So let's get going. So very brief, most probably know me, but I'm a nutritional therapist. I work in Sydney CBD. I mostly see people over 40 and for private consultations, but I also do talks and presentations and workshops like this. I fell in love with nutrition about 15 years ago when I changed my diet and suddenly became pregnant with our first child. And having had troubles for sort of a year, it was quite a powerful change. And ever since then, I've seen nutrition is extraordinarily powerful in many ways. And I now just love trying to share that with other people. If you want to stay in touch with me, send me an email or follow me on Facebook and Instagram. I hope I give useful nutrition information rather than the normal noise that we all hear in the nutrition world. And just before I get started, this is my 4-year-old son, Michael. He's lining up fruits and vegetables and wooing his younger cousin with some beautiful recorder playing. This is Michael, and this is where my interest in Down syndrome stems from. So today's talk, first of all, I'm going to cover what does research on diet and Down syndrome actually say? Okay, the raw science, what is it? Then I'm going to look at, well, maybe we should look at this another way, and that's where it'll get a bit scientific. Please stay with me. I'll explain what that is. And then I'll explain to you the diet changes that might support people with Down syndrome and that we should, I think, 100% be implementing. And finally, I'll give you some practical ideas to take away that implement those concepts.
Nikki, can I just interrupt for a sec?
Sure.
We're getting a lot of delay, so we haven't seen any change in slides.
Oh, well, really?
Yeah, and you froze up for a bit.
Let me see. Why would they? Is it worth meeting out and coming back?
If you like. Yep, give that a go.
Okay, I'll try that.
The joys of technology, everyone.
Yeah. Great when it works.
Yeah.
You'll have to let her back in, Mel.
Yeah. Maybe also, everyone, if you wanted to type answers into the chat as along the way as well, if you didn't want to ask in front of everyone, that'd be okay too. Okay.
Muted. I'm back. Is that any better?
Maybe.
Okay. Sure. I'll share my screen.
Yep.
Yep.
Just made you co-host, Nikki.
Thank you. Okay. Have you got the slide research diet and Down syndrome?
We haven't got any slide now.
No, not yet.
Really? I'm going to email it through to you, Melissa and Julie.
We can see it now.
Can you?
Yeah.
Okay, actually. I'm going to send. Yeah?
Yep, that's better.
Okay, coming back. Okay. Why can't I get you back? There we go. Okay, so you have it now and you can hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. We can hear you. It's just gone back to non-presenter mode.
Non-presenter mode. So you guys, everything's good?
Yep, that's good now.
Yep, that's good.
Okay. Fantastic.
Research on diet and DS.
Perfect. Yep. All right. Sorry about that. So first thing is, what does the research actually say about diet and Down syndrome. So when we look for research, we head to a global database called PubMed, and this houses about 31 million research papers from around 5,000 medical journals on medical research. Now, there's 31 million papers there, and every paper in there is tagged with these things called MESH, or medical subject headings. And when a research article is tagged with Down syndrome, we can then pick it up using a filter. And this shows us that of the global research, there are 27,000 papers tagged with Down syndrome. Yeah, so 0.1% of the research base. So how that compares to other research areas? If we look at the top two, we've got Down syndrome, and I've picked cystic fibrosis here because it's the second most common genetic disorder. And what you can see there is Down syndrome has 27,000 papers, which is the most common genetic disorder, yet the second most common disorder has 42,000 papers. So there's really not a lot of research on Down syndrome, which isn't a great starting point. And then I've picked out a few other areas of tagging. So something that's tagged with Alzheimer's, around 100,000 papers. Dementia, there's around 200,000 papers. And something like heart disease, it's about 2.7 million papers. So you can see there's not a whole lot of research on Down syndrome. What was really interesting when I was looking at this was genetic disorders are getting a lot less attention. So if you look at these graphs here, you can see that Down syndrome and cystic fibrosis, the amount of research on each topic has gradually increased over the years. So from 1945 through to 2024, the amount of research has steadily increased. And that's good. And research is exploding globally. But have a look at the shape of these graphs. So you can see that diabetes and Alzheimer's, which are essentially chronic diseases that are affecting populations around the world, you can see they're getting an exponential increase in research that we're not seeing with Down syndrome. So historically, Down syndrome has had a lot of research, but it's starting to get completely outweighed by research on other chronic diseases. And why is that? It's because chronic diseases affect a much larger population, and there's a lot more money in it for finding solutions. So essentially what I'm saying is Down syndrome has some research, but not a lot, and it's not increasing as much as we would like, see more in the chronic diseases areas. Now, what about research on Down syndrome and diet? So remember I said there are 20,000 papers on Down syndrome, and I showed you that there were 1.3 million papers that are tagged with diet, nutrition, and food. So how many of those 27,000 Down syndrome papers actually look at diet, nutrition, and food? So what's that intersection there? And the answer is there are 370 research papers. And one study actually said the low number of studies is striking. Okay, there is not a lot of research on diet and Down syndrome. And then if we drill down again into those 370 papers, only 13 of them are what we call quality research. And that's randomized controlled trials. And they're studies where they're able to show that, let's say you give blueberries to one group of people, but not to the other group of people, and you see what health conditions they develop. That is a randomized controlled trial. And it can show that blueberries cause, let's say, cognitive improvement. All the other studies are just associations. So it's these people, they seem to eat a lot of blueberries, and they seem to have really good cognitive improvement. So there's an association between blueberries and cognitive improvement. So the quality of those studies isn't as good. So essentially, there are only 13 research papers which are really worth looking at when it comes to diet and Down syndrome. And Our study pulled this out, said there is an absence of clinical trials with dietary intervention. Okay, so there really isn't much. And what do these 13 papers tell us? So looking at these 13 research papers, first of all, none of them actually study diet and food. All of them study supplements, and mostly the supplements are B vitamins and antioxidants. So that raises a question, why are they studying B vitamins and antioxidants? And there are a few studies on exercise and bone health, but the most recent ones really trend towards looking at antioxidants. And I'll come into defining what all these mean later. But the point being, we've got 13 quality research papers looking at diet and Down syndrome. And those 13 quality papers only seem to look at supplements of B vitamins and antioxidants. The other thing is that these 13 papers didn't really find much. And when you look at them, and I can show you a bit more detail on these studies at the end if anyone would like, they really didn't find much. But you can't really hang your hat on them because they were on small populations of people. So there'll be 60 adults were studied having an antioxidant supplement for 3 months. So we can't really hang our hat on any of the findings in these 13 research papers. So I could just end my talk here and say there is no evidence for a right diet. And so what the research papers say is we just have to apply the normal guidelines for healthy eating when we're talking about diet and Down syndrome. And that's a bit of a disappointing find. But what I'm going to show you is there's another avenue we can look at, and it's definitely worth looking at. And that's what I'm going to tell you next. But this idea that people with Down syndrome should just eat a normal, healthy diet is largely what we hear in the Down syndrome world. So the nutrition handbook I bought, and I was very excited to read something interesting, and it was the common message of lots of fruit and vegetables, healthy, lean proteins, etc. Then I found this from the Voice magazine in Down Syndrome Australia, and it again says eat a healthy diet. It did say there might be some extra need for a nutrient called zinc, so that was interesting. Brian Scottco, Dr. Scottco, he advocates reduced sugar, again, part of a healthy diet with a specific focus on Alzheimer's. Down syndrome in the UK, again, just a healthy diet. And Brian Chicoine, again, it's a healthy diet. So people with Down syndrome should have the same diet as everyone else. I couldn't resist including this picture, but wait, there's more. There are themes in the research, okay? And when we see themes in the research, that might suggest that that's where the money is. There's a reason that people are researching these areas. So of those 13 studies and the 370 studies that weren't so good, the things that were studied were B vitamins and antioxidants. And I'm going to come into these in a bit more detail later, but nutrients that supported antioxidant systems within the body. So there's a clear theme coming out of the research, but it's not research that's saying you should have these. But why are these themes coming up? Why are they getting funding to research these nutrients? And this sort of aligns with, maybe I get a lot of noise about this in my world because I'm in the nutrition arena, but I hear a lot about supplements targeted for nutrition, for Down syndrome, people with Down syndrome. And the ingredients of these supplements tend to be very heavy in the B vitamins and antioxidants. So maybe there's a bit more to explore. And so we have to take a different approach to finding the right diet because, in summary, the research on diet and Down syndrome tells us there isn't an answer. There is very little research that tells us what people with Down syndrome should eat for optimal health. So what's the approach? there's an area, and this is where my talk's going to get a little bit scientific. Try and stay with me. If you can't, I will come back to what we need to do from a diet perspective afterwards. Right, there's a growing area of research called epigenetics, and this is the idea that the environment to which genes are exposed will impact how the genes express themselves. So genes aren't everything. And there's a lot of research in this area, and increasingly, and a lot of the research they do is on identical twins, because identical twins have exactly the same genetic makeup. Yet, some twins will develop health conditions at different times in their life and different health conditions altogether. How is it that people with exactly the same genes get different health conditions or express themselves differently? It's not the genes, it's something else. And that is what epigenetics is. It's the idea that something in our lifestyle, in our environment, plays on those genes and tells the genes to express themselves in a different way. So that's epigenetics. And this is because it means that genes aren't everything. So we know people with Down syndrome have an extra copy of the 21st chromosome, but that may not be the answer. It may be that the environment to which their genes are exposed will influence how those genes express themselves. And there is research and theories and discussion around how epigenetics may explain how Down syndrome expresses itself differently in different people. So the wide range in cognitive function, and some people have the palmar crease, but others don't. So there's a wide-ranging phenotype, and it may be because of epigenetics. So this is great because it means by influencing or changing the environment to which genes are exposed, those genes might express themselves differently. And the reason this is so great is because diet is modifiable. It's changeable. We can't change genes. We've got them for life. They're set in stone. But diet and the environment around us can be changed. So the question obviously is, how do we diet for the better? And that's what I'm going to come on to. But bear with me for a couple more slides on science. So a key epigenetic mechanism, so a key way that the environment influences how genes express themselves, is through this thing called methylation. Okay, so methylation is an epigenetic signal, and methylation can walk around the genes of a person's entire genome, all the genes, and turn them on or off, depending on how this methylation thing is working. So it's not just relevant to the 21st chromosome, it's relevant to every gene. Okay, so if methylation is working properly, genes will work properly. But if methylation isn't working properly, then some genes we want turned on for good health will be turned off. And that's not what we want. So this is methylation. And I wanted to give you a great description of it. My husband said it was too much. So the super quick rundown is methylation is disrupted in people with Down syndrome. So these little spinning circles here don't work quite right in Down syndrome. And that's because of the 255 genes that sit on the 21st chromosome, 7 of the genes involved in methylation sit on that chromosome. So our 21st chromosome, which controls this methylation process, isn't quite right. And therefore, methylation is disrupted in people with Down syndrome. And this is a huge area of research in Down syndrome. And I think around 200 of those 27,000 papers look at methylation. And they've done lots of studies on newborns with Down syndrome and shown that this methylation process doesn't work quite right. My super quick, because I couldn't not tell you the science. Essentially, these two enzymes here work too fast. so that these processes on the methylation cycle work too fast. And the impact is the circles don't spin properly. Homocysteine, which we can measure in blood test, gets too low, and there's lots of oxidative stress. I'm going to come back to some of these again, but these circles aren't spinning properly. So the message to take away is that poor methylation function, the last sentence of this, poor methylation function leads to many chronic conditions. And people with Down syndrome have poor methylation because methylation is largely governed by the genes on the 21st chromosome. So here's where I'm about to stop for questions, but the message I hope I was able to convey is that the right diet for people with Down syndrome should support methylation because it's not working as well as we want it to, and it should manage oxidative stress because of their disrupted methylation, there's lots of oxidative stress. And I'm going to come back to what that means. That's what the right diet for people with Down syndrome needs to do. And I'll go into, in lots of detail, what foods we need to do to make that happen. But before I do that, I'm going to stop and see if we have any questions. I can't see.
No, I don't think
Melissa,
anyone's got any questions. But if people wanted to type any questions into the chat, that could be okay as well. Maybe we just keep going at the moment, Nikki, and then people might have questions as we go along. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, I think one's come in. Yes, Taylor, is that yes, people with Down syndrome have more chronic diseases, potentially because they're not methylating properly and because they've got this high level of oxidative stress that is accelerating the rate of aging. So, yes, and I'll cover that a bit more in my next section. Okay, so I'm going to keep going. Someone else said the slides are slow and coming up. I'm so sorry. I don't know why. Okay, so I'm now going to talk about diet changes that might support people with Down syndrome, focusing on those two areas, supporting methylation and reducing oxidative stress. So the first section is let's manage oxidative stress. And then everyone should hopefully be saying, what on earth is oxidative stress, Nikki? So oxidative stress is a process that happens normally in every cell of our body every day. So it's the functioning of the cell produces oxidative stress just as a part of living. And so a good example is an apple is living, but over time it gets oxidized. So the oxygen in it oxidizes it and it bruises and ages and becomes a rotten apple. And same with rust, it oxidizes. So it goes from fresh iron to oxidized rusty iron. So that's what oxidative stress is. And in Down syndrome, we have an accelerated model of oxidative stress. And that is largely thought to be because of this disrupted methylation cycle, and these waste products coming out of it lead to lots of extra oxidative stress. And that is why people with Down syndrome, coming back to Michaela's question, develop chronic diseases more often because they are aging more quickly, and therefore the chronic diseases that most people without Down syndrome might start to get around age 70, the people with Down syndrome will start to get it much earlier. So Alzheimer's in their 40s and all the other conditions. Now, the good news is that oxidative stress can be balanced with something called antioxidants. So it's a bit of a scale. There are cells where we have stresses, we can balance that out by giving, I like to say, sort of good oxidative stress is the bad guys, antioxidant are the good guys, and the two of them fight each other. But what we want is a nice balance. And in Down syndrome, it looks like we want to overcompensate because of that accelerated oxidative stress. So how do we boost up these antioxidants? Let's see. The first thing we could do is slow down the oxidative stress. And the second thing we could do is increase the antioxidants. So first of all, decreasing oxidative stress. The most powerful thing you can do from a dietary perspective is to reduce sugar. So sugar increases oxidation by a rate of at least 7 to 10 times, and it has a powerful oxidative effect. So reducing sugar is it's the most powerful thing you can do. And that also includes things like honey, maple syrup, and dates, which are chemically identical to table sugar. I talked about this in an earlier talk, which is available on Down Syndrome New South Wales YouTube channel, and identifying sugar and how to find it. I won't talk about that, but reducing things that taste sweet will have a powerful effect on reducing oxidative stress. Other things you can do is damaged oils. So oils that have been overheated cooking and they get that sort of rancid smell, or if you've left the olive oil in the cupboard for too long and it sort of gets a smell, they're damaged oils and they cause oxidative stress. Also, refined carbohydrates, they make your blood sugar go too quickly, which I talked about in a talk last year in May. And when it goes too high too quickly, it's too inflammatory on the body, and that also creates oxidative stress. Alcohol, an obvious one, and processed meats have been found to increase oxidative stress. So there's hugely powerful things to do when looking at diet for people with Down syndrome. And then there's obviously oxidative stress from other areas, so smoking, pollution, pesticides, sunburn, and even stress. So that's the one equation. Let's lower the oxidative stress, but how can we boost antioxidants? Antioxidants are the things that come in colourful fruits and vegetables. So just look at those pictures and see all these colourful things that we can eat. And we want to get a variety. Why are these so powerful? Well, it's the plant's own... Yep.
Hi, Nikki. Sorry, the slides are way behind what you're talking about. So we're not seeing what you're talking about when you're talking about it. We're still on oxidative stress can be balanced with antioxidants, the scale one.
Really?
That's
not great, is it?
Just
okay.
No, so we're actually, what we're seeing is way behind what you're talking about.
Okay. Just a couple of minutes and it's really frustrating. Sorry, guys.
Let
me see.
Just suggested whether you turn your camera off, whether that might help speed up the slides.
Yeah,
I don't know whether that's worth a try.
I'm going to see if switch. The Wi-Fi all looks beautiful here, so I don't know why. Try this. I wonder if the recording will come back with Okay. Have people got the slides moving with you now?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So I'll just quickly canter back through, but we want to balance oxidative stress with antioxidants. Okay. And then we talked about the best way to decrease oxidative stress, which is running too quickly in people with Down syndrome, is to reduce sugar, the most powerful tool. Can everyone see the sugar now? Are people seeing that slide?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So decrease oxidative stress. These are the things we want to work on: sugar, damaged oils, refined carbohydrates, processed meats, and alcohol. Okay. Now, on the other side of the balance, we want to increase antioxidants. So feed the body with stuff that can fight or counter or balance out this oxidative stress. And we can do this with colourful fruits and vegetables, with lots of variety, and things, herbs, spices, and chocolate. And the thing that all of these have in common is that they're bright coloured from plants. And why is that? It's because it's the plant's own defense mechanism to fight against bad stuff. So when we eat plant, we get that plant's ability to fight and to counter things like oxidative stress. So these antioxidant foods are hugely, hugely powerful. And having done this research, I've realized how significantly more important it is for me to give Michael as many of these colorful things as I can, because people with Down syndrome really do have an accelerated model of oxidative stress, and you need to do everything you can to fight it. And I'll come on to this later, but is there a place for supplementing with antioxidants? I think yes. Okay. But from a everyday perspective, just get color into diets. And I'll come up with a few ideas of how to do this later as well. Please sing out if the slide hasn't moved. I'll see what I can do. The other thing is we also get antioxidants inside our own body. So our body can make them. So that little picture on the right, which shows you all these sort of scientific things, the point is that this is a system that sits inside our body and it makes antioxidants. So every day as we exist, these things are getting made. So if we support this internal function to work, then we can again counter that oxidative stress. So there are two main ways to do it. The first is what I said is allow time for cleanup. And by this, I mean not fasting, but having breaks between meals with a long break overnight is hugely important for allowing that internal system to make its own antioxidants. And so as a rule of thumb, I would say making sure you don't eat in the 2 hours before bed and allowing at least 12 to 14 hours until the first meal the next morning is very, very powerful. The other thing would be not snacking all the time. So having gaps between meals is also powerful because it gives this system time and space to make its own antioxidants. Okay. The second point is that those little enzymes in that scientific picture, they need specific nutrients to make the antioxidants. Without those nutrients, they can't actually make them. And the interesting point from a nutrition perspective is that getting hold of those nutrients is slightly more challenging than your average food. Okay. The two I want to highlight, there are lots of nutrients, but the two I want to highlight, I think, are the two that are most difficult to get on a day-to-day basis. So zinc and selenium. Zinc is an awkward mineral to get hold of, but I just want you to have a look, and we should be getting 10 milligrams per day. Now, most of us are probably getting some zinc, but whether we're getting the full amount, I think would be quite challenging unless we're eating a super, super healthy meal. But the main takeaway from this is have a look at those oysters. So you only need to eat one oyster and you've got 60% of your day's requirements. So one tiny little oyster and you're almost there. By contrast, if you eat other sort of zinc-rich foods, and these are the zinc-rich foods, you have to eat an awful lot of them. So 2.5 cups of chickpeas, you'd be really a bit full on chickpeas, or 3 chicken breasts, or a regular size steak. That's possible, but that's a large steak, or 8 tablespoons of pumpkin seeds. So on a day-to-day basis, getting zinc is tricky. But if you see oysters and you can get your person with Down syndrome to eat oysters, it would be a wonderful idea. Boost that zinc. Now, my second point is that iron follows zinc. So if you want to measure or find out if someone's got enough or is eating enough zinc, a good one to measure is iron. And that's easily done in GP blood tests. If iron is high enough, then it probably means your zinc is high enough. But if iron is low, then focusing on zinc is quite important.
Can I just ask a quick question there?
Yeah.
I had my son, his pediatrician, when he has when he has his blood tests for iron levels, they actually said that the markers for iron needed to be higher again in people with Down syndrome than the typical recommendation. Is that the reason why? That even though that may appear as, oh, yeah, they're in the normal healthy range,
Yeah.
but they actually may be still deficient in iron, as they do require a higher level of iron?
Interesting. I haven't come across that iron should be higher, because so iron, and I'm not saying don't have iron, but iron in itself is like an oxidative stress. So
Okay.
like iron oxidizes things. So a super high level you wouldn't want. But iron is also, on my previous slide, when I was saying the specific nutrients you need to make antioxidants work, iron is one of those nutrients that's needed to make those systems work. So yes, you definitely need iron, and you definitely don't want iron low. And you want iron slightly high to sort of almost prove that zinc is high too.
Right.
Both of them are really important. Equally, I don't think you want them excessively high.
No.
So yeah, I think what your pediatrician is saying is probably the same thing as me, that zinc and iron need to be high, but I wouldn't say excessively high.
Yeah, it wasn't excessively high. They just said, look, I try and sort of keep an eye out and prefer it to be on the higher side. Then, if it's kind of on the lower side of the normal range, then it always like makes me aware it could be quite a bit lower than that. Like,
interesting.
I don't know, it's just a different way of explaining it, but I think it's along the same line as what you're saying.
Yes, no, I think absolutely. And maybe the reason they're saying that is because of this big oxidative stress burden. The body is just sapping up all the iron to counter it with these antioxidant systems. So it probably is overwork.
Right.
So yeah, absolutely.
Okay, cool. Awesome. Thank you.
Great question. Thank you. Let's try to move the slide. There we go. The next specific nutrient, again, to support those internal antioxidant systems is selenium. Now, selenium's a really tricky one. It's another mineral. We only need 70 micrograms per day, tiny, tiny amount. But it's really tricky because it's in loads of foods, but it's totally dependent on the quality of the soil that those foods are grown in. So ordinarily it'd been grains and plants and all these other foods, but the reality is we can't depend on it because often the soil quality isn't there, so the selenium's not there. And this means we have to rely on these other sources to really get selenium. And the main regular food one is seafood. But to get that 70 micrograms a day, you need to be eating 1 to 2 serves of seafood each day. So it's quite challenging. Other ways are organ meats, but they're not normal fare for most people. And then Brazil nuts are really powerful. So 2 Brazil nuts a day and you get your 70 micrograms. And then everyone's natural reaction is, oh, great, I'll just have 2 nuts a day and the requirement is met. But again, Brazil nuts, the amount of selenium varies widely. It can be next to nothing, or it can be 1,000 micrograms per nut. And this wide disparity, you don't actually know how much you're getting. The other way to get it is supplements. And if you're not eating seafood or a real food diet, there is maybe a place for supplements for selenium. Selenium's hugely powerful in that antioxidant system, but it's also needed for the thyroid to convert to the active form of thyroid. And we know thyroid problems are common in Down syndrome. So maybe there is a place for selenium supplements or really upping that seafood in day-to-day diet. So just to summarize that oxidative stress picture, we've got to balance it out. We've got oxidative stress on one side, which is driven by sugar, but also a few other foods, and just toxic stuff, okay? Pollution, alcohol, smoking, that sort of thing. And we need to balance that because in Down syndrome, it's really accelerated that oxidative stress. And to do that, we can eat brightly coloured fruits and vegetables and use the plant's fighting mechanisms. Don't forget herbs and spices. They're packed full of goodies. We have breaks between eating, clean up time, and really focusing on nutrients like zinc, selenium, and iron in the same category. Hugely important for people with Down syndrome. Okay. The next way we can, so this is the second of the 2 ways that I'm going to talk about of how we can help people with Down syndrome with diet. And this one is to support methylation. So if you remember, methylation is these 2, there we go, these 2 circles spinning round, and they need to spin round properly so that the body makes stuff properly and so that all the genes across the DNA get the right message to be turned on in the right way so that the genes express themselves properly. It's that whole concept of epigenetics, that the environment to which the genes are exposed will influence how the genes express themselves. And in Down syndrome, we want our genes to be expressed as well as possible. And we know that this methylation thing is a little bit messed up. And so we need to do everything we can to support it to make sure that methylation is working properly. How do we do that? So first one on this left-hand side, don't worry about the science. The message is we need to make sure we're getting enough folate, which is vitamin B9 or the pregnancy hormone, pregnancy supplement that people get told to take. The second one is we need this vitamin B12, and that mostly comes from animal foods. And the third one is other B vitamins. Now, this whole process is a whole topic in itself, and I'm not going to bore you with the details, but broadly speaking, these are the 3 messages I want to tell you today. So where do we get those vitamins from? So vitamin B9 or folate, it's the supplement that most people get told to take if they're planning to get pregnant. And folate, the word actually comes from foliage. So it's green leafy stuff. So if you're thinking what foods have folate, think about your leafy greens, your leafy vegetables like broccoli, your leafy Brussels sprouts, but also things like liver and also brewer's yeast. I've put on the right-hand side the sort of approximate amounts that are in certain foods. And what you'll see there is things like bread have folate in them. And that's because in Australia, to manage the concerns in pregnancy of inadequate folate, we have fortified our foods. So folate gets added to lots of grain-based products. It's actually added to flour. So products like cereals, breads, pastas, fruit juice, and Vegemite will all have folate in them. Just a note of caution, if you do eat organic breads or organic pastas, organic flour doesn't have to have folate added to it. So if you're eating organic foods, just check the ingredients and see if folate is there, because it's important to get enough folate. It's hard to get folate from natural foods because it's easily, coming back to oxidize, it's easily damaged by light and heat and cooking. So if you plucked a spinach leaf out of your garden and put it straight into your mouth, it would have, let's say, 100 things of folate. But if you then took that spinach inside and put it in your fridge for a week and then you cooked it, the folate might have decreased to about 5, sort of relatively. So it is very hard to get folate from food unless you're plucking it straight from your garden into your mouth. And that's why foods have been fortified. Now, there's just a word of caution around the relying on fortification and supplements for folate, because you can, if you're eating a lot of breads and pastas, you can easily get too much folate, and excess folate in this fortified, it's a different form. And in this different form, if you have too much, it has been linked to health, negative health outcomes, including cognitive decline. And so you just need to make sure you're not having too much folate. So not too much bread, too much cereal. I think it's unlikely that that would happen in normal life, and the government's designed the fortification so that doesn't happen. But if you're taking a supplement of folate, which includes folate, in addition to your regular diet with fortified folate foods, you could hit that upper limit probably quite easily. So it's important to think through all the sources of folate in the diet. But my main message would be, you can't overdo it with real food folate. So eating fresh greens as often as you can is a great way to get folate levels up to the recommended minimum. Okay, the next vitamin that's really important to support this methylation process is vitamin B12. Now, vitamin B12 only comes from animal foods. So if you are eating particularly a vegan diet, it's likely that your B12 is not adequate. Vegetarians should be able to get some B12 because it will be in yogurt, eggs, cheese, and animal products. But vegan diets will not have any animal products, so they will not have any vitamin B12. And so a supplement for a vegan diet is definitely recommended. Anyone eating animal food should easily meet their B12 requirements. But there's a caveat. As you get older, your ability to break down the vitamin B from the food and put it into your bloodstream in your body decreases. So it's very common with age that vitamin B12 levels go down. So with age, it is worth making sure that your GP measures this when they do the routine blood tests. And same story, if someone has poor gut health, again, poor digestive health, again, vitamin B12 may not be digested and absorbed properly, and levels could be low. The good news is vitamin B12 is easily tested in GP blood tests, and there's no reason not to. So sometimes it's just a matter of asking. So if you've got someone with Down syndrome who has poor gut health or is at the older end, then definitely make sure that level is tested. And just as an aside, my parents went to a drinks party the other night, and they met an older guy who was using a walking frame. My dad said, oh, what happened? And he said, oh, I can't feel my feet. I've got sort of peripheral new breakdown of the nerves in his feet. Dad said, oh, what caused that? And the guy said, well, my B12 levels were too low and I didn't know. And he lost the feeling in his feet and now has lost the use of his feet. So keep an eye on B12. It's important. And people with Down syndrome absolutely need to have it. And it's easily tested. And then the third vitamin, to make sure that methylation process is working properly so that epigenetic signal is right, should logically follow everything else, as long as you're eating real food. The risk factors for not getting enough B vitamins, PPIs, which are protein pump inhibitors, they're medications taken for reflux and heartburn. They can sometimes mess with the body's ability to get them into the body, or vegetarian or vegan diets, then B vitamins can sometimes be an issue. Always try and have grain-based foods with their husk on, because that's where the B vitamin actually sits. So if you're having beautiful white breads with non-whole meal versions, then that B vitamin will be depleted. And if you're eating animal products, then generally B vitamins aren't a problem. So in summary, support methylation in people with Down syndrome. The system doesn't work quite right. And the 3 vitamins we really want to focus on are vitamin B9, folate, vitamin B12, animal foods, and all of these B vitamins, let's just make sure we're eating real food. And so I've come to the end of the diet ideas that support people with Down syndrome. And I just want to sort of flip back to where we were at the start. There are consistent themes. The research papers that we looked at the start, remember, there were 27,000 Down syndrome papers and 370 of them looked at diet and Down syndrome. And 13 of them, the quality 13 papers, were all looking at antioxidants and B vitamins, particularly the more recent research papers. And that suggests people think it's worthwhile. They've invested money in this research for a reason. And that is because of what I've tried to explain to you today, this concept of epigenetics and methylation being disrupted in people with Down syndrome. So there's a theme of antioxidants and B vitamins in the research. And when we look at these Down syndrome supplements that we see, they are also antioxidants and B vitamins. So I've just tried to pull out the ones that are relevant to this talk. So there's your B vitamins. There's your zinc and selenium. Over here, we've got nutrients that are relevant to methylation that's not working quite right. We've got another nutrient for an antioxidant system, more nutrients for antioxidant systems, and more nutrients for antioxidant systems. So there's a real theme here. Antioxidants and B vitamins are definitely needed in people with Down syndrome. Okay, so practical ideas to take away. All great, Nikki, but what do we actually do? So in a quick summary, diet, get the basics right and get it right as a family. And my talks last year, particularly around carbohydrates and refined carbohydrates, would be my first and foremost message. Let's get that right first. But then let's reduce oxidative stress, sugar. And that, again, the talk last year, if you want to know more about sugar, revisit that one. Reduce oxidative stress, sugar is the main player there. 7 to 10 times more powerful than other foods at causing that stress. The third one, eat antioxidants. Fruit and vegetables, herbs, don't forget herbs and spices, don't forget chocolate, dark chocolate. And so let's put antioxidants into our body, but let's also support the systems that we've got in our body already. So let's make sure we're getting enough selenium. Let's make sure we're having seafood to get the selenium, zinc, oysters where we can, if we can, and have breaks from food. Let the system do its work. And finally, let's help the circles to spin. Let's help methylation. Let's make sure B vitamins are getting into the diet. Testing and supplements. So I've mentioned a few GP tests, and I'm going to list them out on a next slide. There are lots you can ask for, and there are lots that can give you ideas of whether things are or aren't working quite right. And with supplements, I'd always say test or get advice before supplementing, because they do have impacts beyond just, oh, it's just a supplement, don't worry about it. They do go straight into that methylation process and spin things around, perhaps in ways you don't want, or you can overdo the folate and reach that upper limit. So please do be careful with supplements. And then I've put functional tests. So if you visit a naturopath or a nutritionist, they do, or I do have the capacity to order functional tests, but they're really expensive. But they take this analysis of what's going on in a person with Down syndrome to the next level. And I obviously didn't talk about exercise, but exercise is a clear, good part of health, and it will do all these good things as well. So just find something that's fun and enjoyable, and don't forget it. Testing. These are, so of the stuff we've talked about today, these are the ones that you could ask your GP for that will give you a good indication of what's going on in this picture. So there's homocysteine, vitamin B12, B6, sometimes GPs won't do, but B12 and folate, they will absolutely do. There's this CRP, which measures inflammation, and inflammation can often be a marker for how much of this oxidative stress is damaging and upsetting the body. There's ferritin, which measures iron and gives an indication of zinc. And then GPs can also do a certain degree of gut health testing, and that may be important to find out if the nutrients you're eating are actually getting into the body. And then, yeah, functional testing, like I said, it's expensive. I've included some of the price list stuff here, and that would show you how well methylation was working, but it, you know, $380 here and there, it's a lot of money. And I'd say only worth doing if you really need to. I won't go through this again. It's just saying what I've already said, but if you wanted to print something out at the end of this talk and stick it on your fridge to remind you, these are the things we've talked about and the reasons why. So making it a bit more practical, I've put together an antioxidant recipes download here. So it's got 4 recipes that I commonly cook at home and can vouch for, and they're just full of colour. If you look in that picture at the bottom right, you can see some greenish looking pancakes. They've got spinach, eggs and oats. So lots of spinach that Paul Michael eats for breakfast every morning. And we always have frozen berries. Berries are full of antioxidants. So use that QR code if you want to go and download those recipes. Sorry.
Can I ask a quick question? When you've just finished this list, do you mind just flicking quickly back to that last list? I was just trying madly.
Oh, sorry, yep, go for it.
I'll just take a photo, actually, that's quicker. Brilliant, thank you, sorry.
Nice.
Just wanted to remember before I forgot like where it was up to.
yeah, life's too busy. So a couple of ideas that I use in our household. So liver or organ meats are really just not fair in the modern world, and they're even hard to buy in supermarkets. But what I do is I buy chicken liver, I buy a few packs at once. It's very, very cheap, and it is super nutrient dense with all those minerals that people with Down syndrome need. I actually blend it up in our blender to sort of not water, but I'm a bit grossed out by it, but not to water, but to sort of small pieces. And then I put it into ice cube trays, large ice cubes, and freeze it. And then every time I make a bolognese, I add 2 of these cubes into the bolognese. And the nutrient density of that bolognese boosts 20-fold. And the kids don't know it's there. we all get extra nutrients. It actually increases the flavour a little bit because bolognese can be a bit nothing. So adding finely chopped chicken liver is a really practical and easy way to get nutrients into the diet. I also, when I'm doing the bolognese, I always go out to the herb garden, pull out loads of whatever's growing and just finely chop it up and stick it in. Yes, it'll be depleted by the heating and the cooking, but it's fresh from the garden, straight in, and we eat it that night. So there are a couple of sort of practical ideas. Frozen berries. Berries are dark colours and they are relatively low in sugar and they are full of antioxidants. So there is definitely a place for berries in the diet where you can put them in. We always have them with pancakes, but my kids will often eat them as a snack. It's just fresh from the freezer. And my 4-year-old Michael now helps himself to the berries from the freezer. He shouldn't, but he loves the berries. So we get lots in that way. Salmon and seafood for that selenium and the B12. Salmon is really, really good. It's got omega-3s, which isn't relevant to this talk, but is hugely beneficial. But it's expensive and it's getting more and more expensive. So great options are frozen wild salmon or tinned wild salmon. Always have them in the cupboard. And cheaper cuts of quality red meats. So we're all told to eat less red meat, but when we do eat it, let's make sure it's good quality. Now, to get around the cost of that, and when I say quality, let's go for grass-fed. To get around the cost of that, I always suggest go for the cheaper cuts and slow cook them or pressure cook them. And just keep trying no foods in new and familiar ways. So using an example, Michael won't eat salmon. It's really annoying. I keep trying. But he loves sushi, and we were making sushi the other day, and I was making some salmon ones for me and some avocado ones for him. But he was hungry, and I came back into the kitchen, and there he was just helping himself to the salmon, not even in the sushi, but just to the salmon in the bowl being prepared, ready to go in the sushi. So kids, anyone can surprise you in their change or their willingness to try new foods. I guess the end message of this talk is when it comes to addressing diet, a one-size-fits-all approach is inadequate to address a complex condition like Down syndrome because of the diversity of factors involved. So yes, Down syndrome everyone has an extra copy of that 21st chromosome, but how that 21st chromosome expresses itself is incredibly different among people, and how that person's body and systems is operating is completely different. So it's very difficult to come up with a single diet. And what I've tried to do today is give you the core basics for a person with Down syndrome. But if you want to take it to that next individual level, then you need to get advice, or you need to be willing to spend time and sit with me and learn about methylation, which, according to my husband, is not something people want to do. I thought I'd sort of make this a bit more practical and describe what we do with Michael. So my point, or as I sort of thought about how to tell you what we do with Michael, is things change over time. So without going into too much detail, he had a premature birth, so he's full of antibiotics and hospital. So probiotics we focused on then. Then when he was weaning, he had lots of sardines because they're full of nutrients, and lots of liver with the chicken liver. But then he had severe iron deficiency, so we supplemented with iron and we gave him more chicken liver and iron. And then he had another birth, so we had to focus on probiotics. But now he's in great health, and nutritionist Nicky, before doing this talk, would have said there's nothing we need to do. I'll just keep, he has omega-3 supplements. There's nothing he needs. But on doing this talk, I looked at his blood tests, and his homocysteine is unusually low. And being me, I would say unhealthily low. And that is because his methylation isn't working. So without going to the mess, like he's spitting out too much oxidative stress, and that's depleting all his homocysteine. And that means his circles aren't spinning properly. And doing this talk and preparing for this talk has definitely opened my eyes to the fact that there probably is a place for a form of B vitamin supplements with him. And I will probably do that after this talk and then re-measure his homocysteine with the GP. So that's what I'm planning to do. But it's not easy, and health things change and everyone's different. But that's Michael. And there's also the problem that now he's getting older, he has a really sweet tooth and he loves ice cream and he loves all good things. And it is a challenge. I always say to people, get the basics right first. If you want to, I run online health programs throughout the year. The next one's starting in May. But this is looking at carbohydrates and sugars and learning how to eat them, how to choose them and how to eat them in the best way possible. Further resources based on what we've talked about today, go and see your GP, do some blood tests, find out if there are any deficiencies. Just do the best you can with what's available. But if you found this sort of nutrigenomic, this epigenetics methylation thing interesting, there's a lady called Gabby Giacomin, up Queensland, Byron Bay area, who has a business called The Conscious Pod. And she's really in the weeds and the thick of analysing these circles. If you're interested just from and she works in the Down syndrome space. If you're interested in genetics and epigenetics from a sort of everyone perspective, not just Down syndrome, then I'd recommend this book by Ben Lynch called Dirty Genes. And it's very readable for people who aren't in the thick of it. And last of all, this methylation concept, there's loads and loads of research on it because it does impact people without Down syndrome. And there's information coming out your ears about the process. So if you did want to read more, MTHFR Support Australia is a fantastic website. So what next? I would say, based on this talk, just build an awareness of which nutrients might be abundant or might be lacking. And that awareness is the first step of thinking about how to change or how to make small changes. It is about small changes. Download these antioxidant recipes, get some antioxidant recipes and start to introduce them. Do some GP tests, get the basics right. Got that online health program. Or just engage with nutrition on a day-to-day basis. So you can subscribe to my Instagram or Facebook, or there's loads of nutrition stuff out there, but it is powerful and it does make magic happen. And yeah, anyone is very welcome to get in touch with me for a 15-minute chat. I'd be more than happy to talk about my favorite topic. If you follow that link, I think there's a button you can click on my website to book in onto my calendar.